Hi, and thank you so much for watching George Romero's The Amusement Park. Surely a momentous release, a once lost film by one of the great filmmakers in horror. Today, I'm joined by an incredible panel to discuss what this movie is, where it went, and why we're seeing it now. I would love to introduce Suzanne Derochet Romero,
Oh,
Sandra Stuhlberg, president of Indie Collect and head of the Indie Collect film restoration team, Mr. Greg Nicotero, executive producer and director of The Walking Dead and Creepshow, and of course, absolute genre legend, and author and writer Daniel Kress. Thank you everyone for being here today.
Howdy.
thank you.
What I'd love to start with, Suzanne, if that's okay, is really what is the story of the amusement park? You know, how did it come to be and how did it come to be lost? What does it mean that it was a once lost film?
Lost is maybe a mistake to say because it was never really lost. It was more shelved is probably the right word to use. And Julia Dagnola, who was the film festival director, had used it for as a retrospective of George's work. And about 6 months before George passed, she gave us the 16 millimeter film and a DVD of it. And about 3 weeks before George passed, we watched it all together. And we were astounded that he had never mentioned it. And we thought it was terrific. And it was meant to be seen at community centers for the Lutheran Society, and it was a precursor to Meals on Wheels and other support programs for the aged, especially the people who didn't have money, which is essentially often what happens with elderly people. So it was a film that George dismissed as a nothing, and at the end of the day, we disagreed, and it became the foundation, the George A. Romero Foundation's first completed work to get it restored. Actually, yeah.
It's incredible because in many ways it feels like it has a lot of his perspective in terms of ferocity, in terms of an indictment of American society. Do you have an idea of why he dismissed it?
I think it was because it was a very quick shoot. It was his first job that he was, an only job that he was hired to do. He was a work for hire, and it was never supposed to be published in any way. So he just thought, it was nothing. It was a 3-day bing bang boom, and on we go.
So Sandra, when it came to Indie Collect, what sort of shape was it in? Tell us about the work that Indie Collect did in restoring it.
Well, as Suzanne came to us thanks to a mutual friend and colleague in 2018 with these two very bedraggled prints, 16 millimeter prints. And first one and then a second one. We kept hoping that another print would be of superior quality, but unfortunately, both the prints were not only scarred in many ways, they had obviously been used, but more, what was more difficult was that they were extremely faded, both of them. So this was an extremely challenging restoration. We generally prefer to restore a movie from the original film negative. And if if the negative has been lost or destroyed, the next best iteration is the interpositive, then you go to an internegative. Generally, the least satisfactory material from which to work is a print, and especially a print that has suffered, that has been projected. And print stock also was not, just wasn't made to be a preservation medium. So we were really up against it, as Suzanne knows. And when we first looked at we first scanned these two prints, as she knows, we were very honest about the challenge and about we were trying to frame her expectations of what could be done. But I have to give incredible credit to Anastasia Chipola, the primary colorist on this film, and Oscar Miarca, another of our senior colorists, because they did extraordinary work to bring this film back to life, combining the best scans from these two prints and essentially saving this movie. I mean, the original elements are gone. We don't know, Suzanne, and we don't know what happened to them. As she said, George didn't really take this film that seriously. And because it was so much more disturbing than I think the Lutheran Society banked on, it was, I would say, lost from view. It was lost from view, and it was abandoned. It was an orphan. And I'm just so grateful that Suzanne and the foundation took the initiative and gave us the privilege of restoring the film. It's an amazing work, and it absolutely is a George Romero film. It's got his hallmark, and he's in it, which is also an extraordinary. When we discovered that, we were so shocked and so thrilled to see that he has a marvelous cameo in the middle of the movie.
That is a quite a nice surprise. Greg, I'm curious, you are a longtime friend, collaborator, colleague of George Romero. Did you have any awareness of this film? When did it first come into your purview?
The only reason that I had even remotely known about, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and it was shot in Westview Park, which was about 15 minutes from my house. I feel like everywhere that George shot was 15 minutes from where I lived. Like, Night of the Living Dead was in Evans City, which was 15 minutes north. And so it's interesting because I vaguely had known about it, but only as a movie that was filmed at Westview Park. I don't even think I knew that George was involved with it. I just remember, knowing about it because I think I was 10 years old or 11 years old when they made it. But again, what's strange is, my relationship with George started back on Martin when my uncle had a part in the movie. So to have a title of a film sort of pop up where, especially a fan of the genre and, my relationship with George, to go like, wait a second, what? There was, everybody knows about the commercials that he did, and everybody knows about all the stuff that Leighton Image did and all those things. And I think you sort of pride yourself on being a connoisseur and an expertise of the filmmakers that you admire and that you follow. And then all of a sudden this thing pops up. I felt a little ashamed. I was like, how did I not know about this? This is crazy. Like I should have known. I should have, it should have been part of my collective conscience as a genre person. But like Suze and Sandra said, this was a work for hire. George didn't write it, which was one of the few instances of something that he didn't write himself. He had adapted Stephen King, and he had, Steve had written some screenplays, of course, for him. But most of the time, George was much more prolific writer than he was a director. I mean, he's got stacks and stacks of scripts that he was working on. And so it's an interesting exercise to know that this film exists. And I think one of the trademarks of filmmakers like George is that, you see other people that he collaborates with, Bill Heintzman, and I think even Michael Gornick. I think Michael Gornick was involved. And, it's nice to know that, as a filmmaker, you tend to surround yourself with people that you like to collaborate with and make you safe. And of course, Lincoln, who was in Martin. So, I think those are the things that pull it more into the Romero world, because you see some of those familiar people that he collaborated with. And just his style, there was something so distinct about the way that George filmed things and his eye, everyone used to say, oh, documentary style, the camera never moved in Dawn of the Dead, except for, I think, one shot when they were standing on the on the railing and the camera was dolling. And George had a very specific style, the way that he shot things. And I think that that grounded his movies and made you feel like you were a little more of a part of them. So I had heard of it, but I never really put the pieces together until Susan Daniel, I think, we were talking about something and they're like, oh, we're going to restore this. And I think it actually was Sue saying, hey, what's Sam Zimmerman like over at Shudder? And I was like, oh my God, you totally need to make a deal with them because they're awesome. And here we are. So look at that.
So when you finally came to see it, I know you mentioned some of the collaborators and the sort of latent image style. I'm curious what else you saw in it that how does it fit into George Romero's filmography in your opinion?
You know, it's really interesting because it does feel like as he grew as a filmmaker, it really does feel like, you know, look, every time you make a movie, every time you write a script, every time you do anything, you can't help but learn from what you created before. And I feel like every step that we take, even if it's a misstep, it allows us to get better at what we're doing. And I feel like with that particular film, that you can see that he's continuing to be more confident and more self-assured. And that's probably one of the reasons why the Lutheran Church was so confused by it, because he was confident enough to push it a little further than they probably were expecting. And I think that shows a maturity in his directing.
It's interesting the way the film starts by basically saying, we as a society have tried all these other things to make you aware of the way we treat the elderly and, you know, ageism and how it runs through us. Maybe this will shake you to your core. Maybe this will change you a bit. So it's interesting that they were both commissioning something that seemed to have that mission, yet maybe a little afraid of the result.
Well, you know, what's interesting about that too is, you know, especially in the last couple years, people don't want to get their information about society. I don't want to get it from the news. But if I watch a movie or if I'm watching something that has a message built into it, I might be a little more susceptible to hearing that message because it's being delivered in a different way. And that's exactly what the amusement park is. It's George delivering a very, very important message in a way that he felt would be different. And, you know, look, every horror movie in the world has a message. And you know, we've been talking so much about Night of the Living Dead recently because of Creepshow and what George's intent was, whether it was intended that Dwayne Jones be an African-American man, and, you know, whatever those intentions were, I always believed that a lot of them were subliminal. But the bottom line is there is a message in there. You know, the morality tale of horror, it always is a message. The bottom line is if you do something bad is going to happen to you. So what better way to sort of educate the world is to tell them using the genre, hey, if you don't take care of these people or you don't do this, something bad could happen to you. That's kind of the whole point. And it's a really unique marketing tool to use it as a way to not preach to people, but sort of captivate them with a different genre.
I'd like
Absolutely.
to follow up on what Gregory was talking about in terms of George's cinematographic style and grammar, because actually the amusement park is an incredibly kinetic. I think the cinematography of this film, the amusement park, is really destabilizing. And when I first saw the film, I was physically queasy, and that's partly the camera work. It's partly the horror, the depredations of age that he depicts so graphically. And it's sort of symbolized also by the roller coaster, which is a kind of almost a leitmotif with the thrill, the excitement, but also the horror when your stomach sinks as you come down into the trough. And that seems to me to represent the fear of the unknown that he's depicting in this film. So it's you know, following up on what you were saying, Greg, about how do you convey, you can lecture someone about all this, or you can make them physically feel the discomfort. And this film is, it's like sense around. I mean, you really feel this discomfort. It's eerie, it's scary.
It's truly disorienting and feels, you know, incredibly nightmarish as a confrontation of, you know, a day in the life in some ways. You know, it feels like the amusement park, all of these aspects of the amusement park are facets of American life or American society that he is stopping in and stopping and touring through, each one ruining him further. Daniel, I have similar questions. You know, but I also believe in some ways you were kind of the herald of this, right? You sort of brought it out into the world and said, this is coming. So I'm curious how you got involved and, you know, what your relationship with George Romero was like and how you see the film.
Right. I mean, first I want to echo what Sandra said. I mean, when Lincoln comes out at the very beginning, he literally says, "We want you to feel the problem." Mm-hmm. And as soon as you get that title card and there's the heartbeat and the ticking clock, I mean, it's hellish and dread-inducing. And I think even before the movie's over, you're, you know, through the assaultive and the disquieting editing, you feel bewildered. You start to feel hard of hearing. You almost feel like you're one of these people in the movie. You're confused. You almost feel sick. You certainly feel helpless. I think it's really what Greg was talking about, the power of this movie. I came to it in an interesting way. I think just a month or two after George passed, I was brought on to, you know, to help shepherd George's book across the finish line. And I visited Sue's with the express purpose. One of my purposes was to ask her, does anyone know where the amusement park is? Because I had years ago read the scholarly book by Tony Williams, where he mentions at the very end that years ago he saw the amusement park. And so I'd been aware of it for a long, long time, but considered it an impossible dream. I had this conception in the novel that the final act would have to do with old age and sort of issues around like hospice care and sort of zombies at the end, when the zombies themselves were getting quite old. And I thought, wow, if I could see the amusement park, it would give me a full length piece of how George thought of these exact same issues. You know, it was like the magical key that I wanted. So I asked Suze, does anyone have any idea where this is? And she was like, oh yeah, we watched it recently, and we have it. So before it was restored, she allowed me to see it, and I was just blown away, and thought, you know, that this was a remarkable Romero film that really fit into what he was doing around the time. You know, I think the editing, if he was, I think, in a filmic language sort of way, if he was an innovator in a certain formal category, it was certainly editing. And during that period, of course, he was making The Crazies, Season of the Witch. Even in There's Always Vanilla, there's a certain, as Sandra was saying, certain kinetic energy. And I think the amusement park carries that beautifully and horrifically. And I still think that, I mean, although he was mostly known as a horror filmmaker, I feel like horror wasn't really number one on his list of what he was doing in most of his films. But I think in maybe Night of the Living Dead and The Amusement Park, it was. Like, I really think those two films are out to really upset you, first and foremost. So I started talking about it. I mean, before I was even finished with it, I started talking about it. I was talking about it online and then in interviews, and just started proselytizing for what I thought was this amazing work that needed to be seen. And I had every confidence that it would be, because it was so powerful. And now here we are.
That's wonderful. You know, as we sort of near the end of this discussion, Suze, I would love to turn it back over to you and know, you know, your feelings on this being out in the world and what you hope audiences take away from it. In many ways, it is not a traditional horror movie, but we are all responding to its aggression and the fright that it leaves you with. How are you feeling on the eve of its release?
I'm excited that the fans and the Romero completists will be able to see this film, and mostly I'm also very keen on getting that message out. It's an important message. We mustn't forget it. It was filmed in 1973, and the issues remain exactly the same today. And George had a knack of just, nailing the issues. And he had a beautiful style. And so here we are. And even though the Romero footprint is all over this film, I do urge that we all take the message and really start being more supportive to our elderly folks.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Sandra.
Yeah, because we're going there. We're all heading in that direction in a real hurry. So I think that we all need to understand the issues here, and how lovely is it that we get to enjoy another Romero film and celebrate his legacy and his career.
And I would say that, just like old people are in danger of extinction, old movies are in danger of extinction. We saved this one, and there's now, we scanned it using a Kineta archival scanner in 5K and creating a digital preservation master, but there are thousands and thousands of indie movies that are at risk of extinction because either they don't exist in a digital format and can't be seen anymore, or the actual original physical materials are in danger. So this is the alarm bell that I'm ringing at Indie Collect, that we really have to take these are treasures. This is the last 50 years of American independent film, and George was an independent par excellence and a social critic of the first order. And there are other Romero films that also need restoration. So this is a mission that Suzanne and the George A. Romero Foundation and Indie Collect are on. And it's so wonderful to have all of you supporting this film as a symbol of what we risk losing if we don't keep saving these films and making sure they remain accessible.
That is a beautiful note to end on. Thank you, all of us. Thank you, all of us. Thank you, all of you, for your time today in speaking about the amusement park and taking time to support what an event this is. It's really beautiful to have this film out in the world.